Hello. Welcome to the next in the series of review clips designed to assist you in preparation for your Biology 3201 public examination. In this clip, we'll be examining pedigrees and pedigree charts. Simply put, a pedigree is a chart or a diagram that shows the genetic relationships among a group of related individuals. In short, pedigrees are like family trees. The function of a pedigree is that it allows us to trace the inheritance of traits in humans across generations. So if you look at a pedigree chart, typically a circle will represent females, whereas a square represents males. When you see a horizontal line that connects males and females, this represents a marriage, it represents a mating. Vertical lines, on the other hand, connect parents to their children. When you have a half-shaded circle or a square, this indicates that the person is a carrier for that disorder but is not showing the disorder themselves. Whereas a completely shaded circle or square indicates that the person has the trait. If the circle or square isn't shaded, the person neither has the trait nor are they a carrier, in typical fashion. Pedigrees, family pedigrees, are used to determine patterns of inheritance and individual genotypes. Using this chart here by way of an example, you can see that the parents, in this case, Joshua Lambert and Abigail Linnell, they had two children, Abigail and Jonathan. Jonathan showed the trait in question. In this case, you can see that the trait in question is deafness or the ability to hear. John Eddy and Hebzibah Daggett, by way of example, they had normal hearing, yet we don't know if they were homozygous or heterozygous. Based on the fact that Elizabeth Eddy, who married Jonathan Lambert, had children with non-hearing disorder, we could backtrack to determine that both Mr. Eddy and Ms. Daggett were heterozygous. Otherwise, their daughter, Elizabeth, could not have passed on that trait as evidenced in her children. Remember, each child of two parents that are heterozygous for a recessive trait has a 25% probability of being homozygous recessive. You would have went over that concept in Mendelian genetics. The pedigree chart is simply a way of diagramming that out. And remember, typically males are squares, females are circles. Unshaded squares are homozygous for the dominant trait. Shaded, homozygous for recessive. Whereas half-shaded typically represent heterozygous or carriers for disorders. Males, squares, females, circles. Horizontal line indicate parents. Shaded, showing the trait. Half-shaded, heterozygous for autosomal traits. Vertical lines indicate offspring, and of course, if reference, generationally written in Roman numerals down the side. You can see here a pedigree chart for the royal families of Europe. In this case, it was diagrammed out to indicate that hemophilia was passed down through the generations, beginning with Queen Victoria. The royal families of Europe had hemophilia in their traits, and in fact, one of the reasons for the Russian Revolution was the fact that there was indeed a hemophiliac child. But this diagram shows the pattern of hemophilia as passed on from Queen Victoria. So when you are looking at pedigree charts, you can determine the patterns of disorders based on what you see. Typically, if a disorder is present in every generation, this is an autosomal dominant disorder. If the disorder skips generations, it is autosomal recessive. Yet, if a disorder shows up in one sex predominantly, this is a sex-linked disorder. Past public examinations have offered questions on this topic and present the following for consideration. This question asks, which could be the genotype of individual 1 in the pedigree shown below? You are told that capital E is the allele for free earlobes, which is dominant. Lowercase e is the allele for attached earlobes, which was recessive. Solid square, male with free, the dominant trait. Solid circle, female with free, the indominant. Attached, shaded square, attached female, shaded circle. As you can see, individual 1 has a child with a female who has attached earlobes. Their daughter has 2 sons, all of which has free. Yet, their child, the great-granddaughter of individual 1, does not show the trait. Individual 1 must have passed on a lowercase e to his daughter. We know that because we have this individual which had a child which was showing the recessive. That recessive had to be passed on. Yet, that could have arose from the mother, or it could have came from dad. The choice is D, homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. The lowercase e, the recessive allele, could have arisen from the mother, which would have made this individual big E, little e. We know it would have gotten a big E from dad. This individual must have been heterozygous. Child 1 could have been big E, or big E, little e. That recessive allele could have came down from mom. The big E would have came from dad. If dad was heterozygous, he still could have passed on the big E to result. So the answer is choice D. Another question, as posed, asks, the inheritance of a metabolic disorder, affected individuals are indicated by the darkened circles and squares male. What is the pattern of inheritance for this disorder? We know that in this case here, the individual had 3 children, one of which did not have the trait. If this trait was recessive, it would have shown up, or would have had to have shown up in this trait here. The correct answer is that in this case, when we look at these children, neither of them have the trait, yet one of their children does. Both of these individuals were carriers. To be a carrier, the trait would have had to have been recessive. If it was dominant, you could not have been a carrier. If you had the gene, you pass it on. The correct answer then for the pattern of inheritance is indeed recessive, C. We can eliminate dominant based on the fact that their carriers do not carry it, show it. Incomplete dominance references a third phenotype. And there does not seem to be any distinction between the sexes. So the correct answer is indeed C, recessive allele. This question here, as posed, asks you for the genotype of the mother in the P generation of the diagram below. To diagram this out, we know that P, F1, F2. One of our first clues in solving this one is you look at the individuals that have the trait. They are all male. As they are all male, this leads us to believe that this trait is sex-linked. As a sex-linked trait, we have to consider the sex of the mother in this case. In this case, she is the mother, she is female, therefore she is XX. So we know that the choice must be C or D. As the mother does not display the trait herself, but she has obviously passed it on to her offspring, the correct answer then must be she must be heterozygous. She must be a carrier. So the mother, in this case, must indeed be heterozygous. So the correct answer then would be D, XB, X little b. We know it is sex-linked as it is primarily males, entirely males that have the trait, so therefore sex-linked. Because the mother does not display the trait herself, she must be heterozygous. Therefore D is the correct answer. And this question here, which best describes the gene that caused the condition in the pedigree below? We're told the male has the disorder, the female has the disorder, and a circle, the female does not have the genetic disorder. Again, in order for, if this trait was recessive, both parents would have been recessive themselves. Therefore, they could have only passed on little b's. If it was recessive. If it was dominant, they could have passed on a big B or a little b. Therefore, this trait must be dominant, and both parents are heterozygous. Thank you for your time. I hope you found this learning clip to be helpful.